For all our viewers watching us from all over the globe, we wish all our viewers a very happy Women's Day and a very happy Holi as well. Now, while the world is celebrating Women's Day today, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said that the world is 300 years away from gender equality and women's rights are vanishing before our eyes. While we live in a world where we are constantly evolving and changing, women's rights may have taken a back seat, with the women in Afghanistan being relegated to live like second-class citizens, to the anti-hijab protests in Iran. To talk about all this and how far we are from gender equality, we have with us Lynn O'Donnell, who is an author and a journalist. She was also the bureau chief in Kabul for the Associated Press and the French news agency AFP. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, let me first start by asking you as to how would you assess the status of women in today's time? Do you think we have progressed? And in your viewpoint, is gender equality a distant dream?
Well, I think that what you just said about women's rights taking a back seat isn't quite correct, if I may. I think that it's very much taking a front seat in terms of being rights being rolled back. Yes, of course, we've made a lot of progress. I'm sitting here talking to you. You and I are both working. We're not bound to our kitchen sinks with, a dozen children by the time we're 40. But in some countries, that situation still prevails. So when the head of the UN says that we're 300 years away, he's talking about how rights for many women in many parts of the world are being rolled back. And when they're rolled back in one, it's very easy for them to be rolled back elsewhere. So I think that we're vulnerable and that the front seat effort by patriarchy, if you like, to hold women back, to erase rights that already exist is very much happening. And it's something that we should be thinking about every day, not just on March the 8th once a year.
Absolutely, but just to add to that, like you mentioned, that women like you and me who are voicing their opinions on various issues, they constitute a very minuscule number of women in the world today. I want to talk about the women living in Taliban-ruled Afghanistan. Women and girls have clearly been erased from public life. They're not allowed to step out of their house without a male relative, not allowed to go to the gym or even access public parks, and clearly not allowed to study further. I want to seek your perspective as to what lies ahead for them.
Well, unless there are any consequences for the Taliban's continued abuse of women in Afghanistan, then things will only get worse. You have a situation prevailing at the moment, as you said, where women are not even allowed outside their homes without male chaperones. They can't travel. If they do go out without hijab and chador, they risk being beaten by Taliban goons, and they are arbitrarily arrested, especially if they protest for their rights. Now, things in Afghanistan have never been great for women. Before the fall of the Republic in 2021, Afghanistan was regularly named one of the worst places or the worst place in the world to be born female. But at least there was a constitution that guaranteed equality, protection from violence, property ownership, etc.
Right.
Now, the constitution has been cancelled. The Taliban adhere to fuzzy interpretation of Sharia law, and they basically do what they like. So I see things only getting worse unless there is some consequential rollback. But what you have is an international community that really doesn't know what to do. The West, led by the United States, the NATO countries that had a military presence there for 20 years, have no credibility and certainly no influence with the Taliban. There's no engagement with the Taliban. There is a fear of negative optics if for instance, the US or the UK governments get involved with a group of terrorists and drug dealers who have brought back public floggings and executions without due diligence. So things are getting worse, and really now we're seeing women locked out of education. If you're not going to be training women and doctors so that women can learn and receive very basic such as health treatment, things are only going to get worse, and this will lead to, I think, a return to conflict, conflict that then risks tipping over the borders into neighbouring countries. But there are other places like Iran, for instance, Pakistan, both of which border Afghanistan, where women's rights are very vulnerable, and we've seen 6 months of demonstrations led by women in Iran, and a movement that is now being called a revolution. So watch this space. Women in some parts of the world have reached the limit of their tolerance for very basic and brutal discrimination.
Right, absolutely. I also want to ask you as to in what way can we build gender equality? There are various social reforms and incentives that are given, but do they actually help?
Well, I think what we need is more women to become public representatives, to enter politics, to rise to the highest levels in politics. They're also kept out. There have been efforts in some countries to have quotas so that women are on the boards of listed companies, for instance, or become candidates for high political office. A lot of women don't like that because they feel that they're not there on merit, they're there because of quotas. But at the same time, I think that if women are not representing their societies, their communities and other women, then things won't improve. Rights, fundamental rights are very, very vulnerable. And if we want to talk generationally as well, I don't think younger women these days quite realise what sacrifices were made for them in the last century so that they have the rights that they seem to take for granted in many instances, if I may say, and feel that they're easy to give up. One thing up, it's very, very difficult to get it back. We have to hold on to what we've got, and we have to fight for equal pay, equal representation, equality on every level. And believe me, it does not exist. We're a long way from it. I don't know about 300 years, as Guterres says, but we still are a long way.
Right, absolutely. Just to add to that, that the right of an adult to vote in an election is considered as a basic right in today's time. But let's look at what's happening on the ground. Like you mentioned, that basic rights are not being given to women in various parts of the world in today's time. For example, in Syria, women have been cut off from political engagements. In Pakistan, women have been prohibited from voting in some areas because of patriarchal customs. And we're living in the 21st century. What can be done to ensure that women have all these basic rights?
Well, there has to be pressure on governments in these countries. Syria has been engulfed in war for a long time now. And in conflict, women always suffer the most, women and children, and their rights are very easily taken away from them, and war and conflict and their own security is often used as an excuse. In Pakistan, there have been various political leaders who have fallen back on religion and the extremism of religion to gain popular support, and that means playing into and taking strength from those groups that want to block women from their fundamental rights, and that includes political participation. What we need is ongoing pressure that doesn't let up, that doesn't allow the rollback of women's rights under any circumstances. But to go back to Afghanistan, the men who were there representing the United Nations, which is supposed to be representing you and I as women, as human beings and protecting fundamental rights, these agencies are largely run by men, and many of them want to go along with Taliban strictures on women, saying we cannot operate here, and I know this from people that I talk to there regularly, we cannot operate here unless we go along with the rules of the government of the country that we're in. And I don't agree with that. I think that if the government is not representing and protecting the rights of every single citizen, then the UN is going along with that, then the UN is also undermining my rights as a citizen of another country, and your rights as a citizen of your country. These rights are fundamental and universal, and any attempt to undermine them, and any lack of consequence for undermining them, is potentially my rights wherever I may be. That has to be understood, and women's rights have to be, regarded as fundamental and inalienable under any circumstances.
Absolutely. I also want to add that women are now striving for equality in various sectors and workplaces. I want to seek your perspective as to what do you think about women in active combat?
Oh, I think that comes down to choice. If women believe that that's the vocation for them, then why not? If they're trained and if they're qualified, it all comes down to choice and qualification, regardless of what sex a person is in any profession, in my view. I mean, if you don't want to be a soldier, what's next? You don't want to be a plumber either, because men traditionally do that job. It comes down to choice, individual choice.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us in WION and sharing your insights with us. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having me.